Welcome back, Mr. Lev Vygotsky. Glad you can join us today.
Before we start, let me introduce you to the current world. Mr. Lev Semyonovich Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist who made a great contribution in the fields of child development and cognitive psychology. He was born in Western Russia, now known as Belarus, on 17th November 1896, the same year as another famous psychologist, Jean Piaget. He is often known as the Mozart of psychology because, just like the famous composer, Mr. Vygotsky came up with several different theories in a short span of time, demonstrating his ingenuity. He graduated with a degree in law in 1917 from Moscow State University. There, he studied a range of subjects including psychology, sociology, and philosophy. His formal work in psychology began in 1924 at Moscow's Institute of Psychology as a research fellow. Mr. Vygotsky completed a dissertation in 1925 on the psychology of art, but was awarded his degree in absentia due to an acute tuberculosis relapse that left him incapacitated for a year. Following his illness, he began researching topics such as language, attention, and memory with the help of his students. Among these were Alexei Leontief, the development psychologist and philosopher who developed the activity theory, and neuropsychologist Alexander Luria, who authored High Cortical Functions in a Man. Mr. Vygotsky was a prolific writer, publishing 6 books on psychology in 10 years. His interests were diverse, but often centered on child development, education, the psychology of art, and language development. He developed several important theories about the way children learn and grow within culture and society. However, Mr. Vygotsky's life was cut short by tuberculosis and he died at the age of 38, leaving many of his theories incomplete.
Wow, Mr. Vygotsky. You achieved so much in your lifetime. Could you tell us what motivated you to discover social cultural theory?
To understand my theories, you need to understand the political situation in Russia at the time. When I began working on his theories, Marxism has just replaced dictatorship. Individuals were expected to sacrifice their personal gains for the greater good of the nation. Success of an individual was considered a success for the culture. It was in this environment that I came up with the socio-cultural theory.
It looks like you were under a lot of pressure when you discovered this theory. What exactly is social cultural theory?
This theory stresses the fundamental role of social interaction in the development of cognition. I believe that since the development was greatly influenced by the culture, it varied from society to society. For example, your peers can influence you in a dramatic way, but so can your family, your social class, and your ethnicity. Given all other characteristics exactly the same, a female will develop differently than a male.
It seems like culture really influences a person's development. While browsing on the internet, I came across a term you focus on, which is more knowledgeable other. Is MKO, more knowledgeable other, is limited to only adults and teachers?
Oh wait, I can answer that. First, we need to understand what MKO is. MKO refers to someone who has a better understanding or higher ability level than the learner. Although the implication is that the MKO is a teacher or an older adult, this is not necessarily the case. Many times, a child's peers or an adult's children may be the individuals with more knowledge or experience. In fact, MKO need not be a person at all. In this modern world we live in, electronic tutors have also been used in educational settings to facilitate and guide students through the learning process. The key to MKOs is that they must have or be programmed with more knowledge about the topic being learned than the learner does.
Oh, so more knowledgeable other does not in fact has to be a person. Mr. Vygotsky, could you please explain a little bit about your best known concept, the zone of proximal development?
Kind think about it as a boat going to a shore. You're on the shore and you have the understanding and knowledge in some area, and the learner is on the boat. And there's this big area of gap or sometimes a very small area, and you want to bring that learner onto your shore to have the same understanding or close to the same understanding that you do on a particular topic. That space between where you are, where the learner is, and where you want to get them to, that's the zone of proximal development. The key factors for the success of this learning process are: first, the more knowledgeable other, the presence of someone with the knowledge and skills to guide the learner. The more knowledgeable other is someone who has a higher level of knowledge than the learner and is able to provide them with instruction during their learning process. This may include a parent, a teacher, another adult, or a peer. Next, supportive activities known as scaffolding, provided by the expert that help guide the learner. When a child is in their zone of proximal development, an expert will help them with the minimum amount of intervention necessary. Activities, instructions, tools, and resources that are used to aid in this learning process are known as scaffolding. Examples of scaffolding that educators may use include words of encouragement, demonstrations, and coaching them verbally. The last key factor is social interactions that allow the learner to work on their skills and abilities. For learning to take place, Vygotsky believed that social interaction between a more knowledgeable other and the learner was critical.
Wow, that is very interesting. But one must wonder, how does your social cultural theory differ from Piaget's theory of cognitive development?
First, while Piaget's theory stressed that a child's interactions and explorations impact development, I asserted the essential role that social interactions play. Another important difference between the two is that Piaget's theory suggests that development is largely universal, and mine asserts that it can differ between cultures. The cost of development in Eastern culture, for example, might be different than in Western culture.
There was a brilliant explanation, Mr. Vygotsky. There are actually quite a number of differences between your theory and Piaget's. You may not know this, but your theory has many criticisms. I'm sure you are curious to know what they are, so allow me to enlighten. Firstly, your observation and testing methods have been heavily criticized for your lack of experimental tests. You rely widely on the observation of your subjects to prove your finding, as you believe that social interaction was a key factor to learning. Next, you believe that learners actively engage in the acquisition of knowledge, while other philosophers assume that learning occurs naturally and fluidly. I do agree with you, but your theory does not account for the slower rate of cognitive growth in some children. Thirdly, your theory of language states that learning comes from cultural influences. This theory is criticized because you minimize the role of genetics, instead highlighted socialization as key to language learning. Last but not least, your zone of proximal development theory is viewed as an attempt to make Piaget's theories trendy by rewarding his ideas and presenting them in an alternate way.
I wish I had lived longer to be able to defend my theories. Unfortunately, tuberculosis got the better of me.
I hope someday someone will revisit your theories and properly explain them to the world. That's all the questions we have. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Vygotsky. You will always remain among the most quoted scholars in the field for the international psychological and educational community. Until we meet again.